Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome to the start of the 2024 Step 2 paper walkthrough. So this first video will be a bit of an introduction to what I hope to achieve with these videos, and then a start to think about both exam technique and a unique part of STEP, question selection. So to start with, these videos within this playlist will each be just a single question of this STEP paper. Mostly they will be my first look at the question. Those which aren't, I'll state at the beginning of the video if I have done the question already elsewhere. But the aim there is then to show you or to describe how you would tackle a question the first time you see it, rather than giving you what most other videos would, which is a clean, perfect, optimized solution. Most of these solutions will be a bit more rough and ready, exactly like you would be having to produce in an exam situation. So, to talk a bit about exam technique, STEP is a very unique form of exam because you don't have to do every question. You'll notice that each of these STEP papers, there are 12 questions on the paper. However, you are marked on no more than 6. So you're only expected, and if you're doing more than 6 questions, then something about your exam technique is off. You're expected to only submit solutions to 6 of the 12 questions. And actually, if you look into the marking of it a little closer, to get the higher grades, these are marked S1, 2, 3. Most offers will be based on scoring a 1. This you only need 4 good questions. So even though there are 12 questions, and even though you're only going to get marked on your best 6, you actually only really need to do 4 questions. And that then brings in timing into these things. So the full paper is 3 hours. So if you're doing 4 questions, then that should be about 45 minutes per question. Now, most of these videos that you'll see in the playlist, I think some of the quickest ones I managed to produce were 30 to 35 minutes per question, but some were even longer than that, because of course explaining through your thought process does take a little bit longer. So you should be aiming between 30 to 45 minutes per question. I would suggest, which isn't what a lot of these videos have, I'm lucky here, I can write and erase on each on this software I'm using. I would recommend for most of these that you tackle the questions in a rough manner on some scrap paper first, and then you write them up. Depending on the question, if it's a question variety that you're particularly confident with, you might be able to write a clean solution straight away. And that's something which I'll speak about in a bit about question selection. All of the videos that follow, I did write the solutions from scratch. I did not have a scrap version, which then became the full, but that is because I'm able to erase and rewrite or do scrap working on the side, which then gets erased within this software. And that's not something I'll devise for A-level questions. A-level questions, you're expected to write out everything ready for the examiner to mark, whereas STEP questions often require a little deeper logic, which maybe you need to experiment a bit with first before producing a perfect or a best attempt at the questions themselves. So, one of the most difficult parts of STEP is this idea of question selection. There are 12 questions. Ideally, you complete 4 to a high standard. And you can see even in the blurb at the front, you don't get much if you just pick and choose little parts of lots of questions. So really we want to be finding the questions within this paper where we have the best possible chance to get through the largest amount of the paper. Now, I am recording this video after I've recorded all of the other 12 videos in this series, so I have actually done all of these questions by this point, but I'm going to hopefully talk through some of the thought processes of what I would do at the beginning of the exam and how I would pick which questions to focus my time on. So, I would recommend that when you start any step paper, and this again is part of your practice as well, you read through the entire paper and you start to think which questions are best for me. And that answer will be different for everyone. I know personally that I like questions which are almost numerical in some way, so more number theory-esque questions, things talking about summations, talking about maybe factors, products, multiples, ways to model something algebraically. Those questions I was particularly happy with. I know that anything which introduces a completely unseen concept, so a lot of questions, and we'll see when we get to question 8 in here, they give you something completely unseen at your A-level point and ask you to use, adapt, develop the mathematics around this new unseen idea. I was particularly happy with the statistics questions, which really at this level are really just probability questions. I knew that was a strength. But I also knew that I should avoid the mechanics questions. I often had more trouble with those, and I knew to avoid any geometry style questions, both shape geometry, vector geometry, or coordinate geometry. I often struggled with those more, and that came from many months of practicing lots and lots of step papers and working out what worked well and what I could do quickly and accurately and what didn't. So you should, as you do all these practice, take notice of the patterns of which questions felt good and which questions didn't. Which topic areas, which styles of questions are you most suited to, and which ones were more challenging. So we're now going to read through each of these questions, and I liked to put a little code excuse me, put a little code next to each, either yes, I want to tackle this question, no, I do not want to tackle this question, or maybe I should try this if all my yes questions have already been done. So at this point, I'm not trying to do the question, I'm just trying to work out, is it possible that I could do this question in the 30 to 45 minutes when I sit down and actually do each of them? And this part should take you 5 to 10 minutes of reading through and picking which questions work. There are a couple of patterns with the step papers. 8 pure questions, 2 mechanics, 2 stats. Question 1 tends to be quite a bit easier than the rest of the paper. They do like to make question 1 more accessible. So if in doubt, question 1 should normally be one to go for. And if I'm skim reading through this question 1, this is what I call the kind of number theory-esque style question. There's some condition on numbers, simple summations with some conditions, and you turn those conditions into algebraic conditions and do some maths with it. Reading through, I can pretty much see that that should be fairly comfortable. Picking out some values should be relatively comfortable. There are some vibes here of what I will call recurrence ideas, that what if you've got some solutions, then you have more solutions. That's quite a common technique within these kind of problems. So overall, and then even the last part, find two further solutions. Well, that is a direct follow on from part B there. So everything within this question looks doable. I don't know how it actually works yet, but this question, I would put a big tick on it. I am going to tackle this question. It looks nice, both it's question 1 and it's within the skill set that I know I've got strengths in. Question 2. Again, I'm just flicking through. This is a binomial expansion. It's got some very unpleasant looking summations, but it's linking binomial expansion to integrals. Although this looks horrendous, like just that statement there looks exceptionally unpleasant, I know I can split this into kind of 3 different summations, and each of those summations do look like part A, so I can see that that's probably doable. This looks like complete nonsense, but maybe there's a partial fraction to make it look back like something in part 2. This question all looks fairly doable. This, I would put a tick. I would most likely tackle this question in the STEP exam. Question 3. Again, skim reading through. Straight away, I'm terrified of this question. Lots of things scare me. The fact that we're in trig, the fact that we are distinct points on a unit circle, we're in a coordinate geometry style world, we have rotations, we have geometric relationships. This, for me, would be an avoid. This question, and you can probably compare the videos in the playlist below. This one I would struggle much more with. I won't have the same intuition as others, so I'd avoid this one. Question 4. Okay, this is now a vector geometry. We have, now this kind of balances between two of them. This is a vector geometry, so I'd try to avoid, but it's also got a definition of a new idea, an unseen concept, and the whole thing's about using this unseen concept in some clever way. This is most likely going to be an avoid, but maybe if I don't have enough questions, I've done 4 or 5 others, maybe this will be one that I would attempt over the question 3 that we just flicked through. Keeping it going, question 5. This is now another number theory-esque one. We have functions on the integers. We're talking about the ranges of the functions. Well, straight away I'm seeing range and I'm seeing quadratics, so I'm automatically thinking complete the square, showing that the ranges have an empty intersection. Well, that seems like it's something to do with the integers, so maybe I'm thinking about how square numbers interact with each other. I can probably put something together there. We have more functions. Find integers that lie in the intersection of the ranges. Yep, that's the opposite to part 2. That seems doable. And then the final part is extending it into cubics. Now, there isn't really a complete the square for cubics, but maybe there's some idea of complete the cube. Maybe that's something doable. This seems like most of this question I've got a good idea about. I would put this as a maybe to yes style question. That looks fairly pleasant. Question 6. We have some sequences this time, an inductive proof. That seems fairly standard. More binomial expansion showing coefficients are related. That looks fairly nice. We're linking this together. More binomial expansion. A horrendous final part. But this seems like it'll build up. And it has given me quite an explicit hint at the end. So this feels like this is just follow your nose. Do what you're told to do. Should be quite a comfortable question. Question 7. Now, the word sketch both brings fear and joy to my mind. Sketch is implying we're going to have to think geometrically about some stuff, but sketching curves is one of the most powerful techniques for high-level mathematicians. Flicking through the rest of this looks like a no. This is going to be thinking about the geometry of curves, thinking about intersections, being quite creative with how you draw things. This is a likely an avoid question for my skill set. Question 8, and this is what I referenced earlier as an unseen concept. They've defined something completely different. This is something that's actually introduced in the first or second year of a degree course, the idea of convergence, and then they've asked you to use it. These questions often look incredibly scary because you have no idea how to do the later parts of the question because you've never seen or used the concept before, which actually turns out to mean they're often nicer than you expect because you've never seen it before. If we do have a flick through, we've got some random theorem about sequences. We've defined some functions that create a recurrence relationship. We put some inequalities on those functions. We are setting some bounds to them, and then we need to do some really unpleasant looking integral. Normally this question would be a straight tick. This time I think it's somewhere. I'm going to have a stronger read through of it before I commit to this question, because you don't want to commit to questions and then give up on them incredibly quickly. So this is on that boundary of I'll probably give it a go as my 5th or 6th question, definitely not as one of my first 4. Into the mechanics section. Now, I personally, with the experience I had, I tended to avoid the mechanics questions unless they were collisions. The picture you have to draw has to be so accurate, and you have to interpret the problem very carefully in order to work out what's going on. So here we have a trench. Now, I don't want to spend too long. Skim through. It looks like we've got a projectile. We've got conditions on the projectiles. This could be very pleasant. It's a very short written question, so there's not a huge amount that appears that needs to be done. It's given us a good hint here for part A, but then no hint for part B. So we're going to have to make some mechanical situation up. So this is a very firm maybe. This is something which I'll probably reread halfway through the exam once I've done my first 2-3 questions. Let it kind of grow in my mind to see if I understand the situation as I'm working through other stuff, but a very firm maybe. Triangular prism, and we've now got some sliding, we've got some friction, we've got objects interacting, we're talking about forces and we're talking about friction. Again, my experience was this question could very easily waste a lot of my time, and if I misinterpret or put force wrong or just misread something slightly, this question can be a huge waste of time. This is right on that boundary of maybe it's my question 5 or 6, but it's definitely not one of my first 4. The probability questions, now these I tended to really enjoy and had a very quick and high success rate with the stats section. Again, I'm going to have a flick through. We've got a bit of a pure thing to start, and then we're talking about the expected number of trials in some event. Excuse me. Now, expected calculations are fairly pleasant. Not something you've done a lot of outside of Step World, but once you practice a few of them, I found these really pleasant. Reading through, find the expected, happy with a calculation like that. Find the largest value of p, might be some inequality work. Show if pk is sufficiently small, well, I know that binomial expansions, when part of it's small, nice things happen and we can ignore a lot of stuff. This question looks like a solid give it a go. Again, because I practiced this variety and enjoyed this variety more so. And then finally, question 12. We've got the classic summation stated, and then we're playing some games. So some probabilistic game has been occurred, and we're trying to find the probability of winners. Probability of 2 winners. That second game clearly is a bit more in depth. And then some condition on exactly 2 compared with exactly 1 winner. Again, I liked these probability style questions. They sat well in my mind. This is an almost surely give it a go. So at this point, you should have, and hopefully you are doing similar reading through with me, picked out which questions you feel most comfortable with tackling. And I'd recommend doing those first. So I would do the question 1 straight away. Question 1 is often built to be the most pleasant, and then probably jump between question 2. Which other questions did I take? Question 6, question 8. Maybe not question 8 straight away, but certainly 2. Which was the other number I said? 2. Yeah, it was actually only that one. 2 and 6 I would have a go at. Probably do the 2 stats questions, because I knew those were my strengths. And then go back and reread some of these. So maybe it'll be question 5 that I'll come back to. A topic that I liked. Maybe I didn't see on first read through all the different subtleties. Or maybe question 8 in a similar way. A topic that I know I like, but maybe didn't spot all the subtleties on the first read through, and then maybe be forced to have a go at one of these. I'm not really sure, but I would have never touched question 7 or question 4 or 3 in that step style exam. And that is part of the technique. Now, as you are tackling these papers, I would recommend that you do try every question available in the papers. To start with, you might have some preconceptions of which areas, which topics that you consider yourself to be good at and which ones you aren't. But that's not always matching from A level to step. I found the mechanics of normal A level much more pleasant, much more enjoyable, a high consistency in the normal A level, and enjoyed the statistics a lot less. However, on step, that swapped. I found my mechanics questions often had errors when I came to check and to mark, and were much less consistent and much more time consuming, whereas my statistics questions were much more accurate and quicker in comparison. So you might have some thoughts about what you're good at, but I would recommend, until you've done many, many, many questions, that you do still tackle the entire paper. And the playlist which follows does have full workthroughs of all 12 questions in this paper, hopefully error-free, almost all of them as a blind first look at the questions. You may notice a few cuts in some of the videos. I've tried to keep them unbroken, but there were some errors I made which then didn't lead to any insightful conversations, which just needed to be cut out to prevent the videos becoming too long, too rambly or too roundabouty. But you'll still see many of the errors and many of the thought processes around, has an error occurred and how do I then fix it? Hopefully this series of videos is particularly helpful, and I hope to do a similar one probably to the Step 3 paper of 2024 shortly.